The maid made the millionaire's baby stop crying, and what he did next shocked the entire household. She used only an old melody, and within seconds, silenced the crying that no one else could understand. The millionaire, torn between anger and fascination, decided to investigate who that woman really was. That's when he discovered she was part of a secret network infiltrating the most powerful elite families. Atop Kensington, an affluent area of London, the Albright family mansion commanded respect. With its immaculate gardens and contemporary design, the three-story residence was a symbol of the family's economic power. However, not even the thick walls could muffle the sound that had been keeping everyone awake for weeks, the incessant crying of little Michael, just 4 months old. Helen Albright, 32, with deep dark circles marking her once radiant face, cradled her son without success. With a degree in international law, she had abandoned her promising career to dedicate herself to motherhood. What should have been a period of joy had turned into an emotional abyss she didn't know how to cross. "We've tried everything, Maurice. 3 different pediatricians, test specialists," Helen murmured as her husband entered the room decorated in shades of sky blue. Maurice Albright, 38, adjusted his Italian-framed glasses and consulted the detailed report on his tablet. As CEO of one of the country's largest technology companies, he approached the problem, as he did any corporate challenge, with methodical analysis and a search for efficient solutions. Dr. Mendonca suggested that American technique. "We have to follow the protocol strictly," he replied without taking his eyes off the screen. "That imported device that simulates maternal heartbeats arrives tomorrow. Studies indicate 87% effectiveness." Michael's crying intensified. Helen felt tears welling up in her eyes, helpless. The emptiness that had been growing inside her since childbirth seemed insurmountable. The magazines and websites she had consumed during pregnancy spoke of instant love and natural connection. Nothing mentioned this constant feeling of failure, this mismatch between expectation and reality. "Your father called," Maurice commented, as if mentioning an appointment on the calendar. "He insists we should hire a full-time nanny, someone recommended by that agency the Matthews family uses. I don't want strangers looking after our son," Helen retorted, in a rare display of firmness. "We can't manage alone, Helen. And the nurses we've hired so far haven't been able to resolve the situation." The phone rang. It was Teresa, the housekeeper who had managed the house for over a decade. "Mr. Albright, that young woman is here for the interview." "What young woman?" "The candidate for the domestic assistant position. The one Sandra from the agency recommended yesterday." Maurice frowned, confused. He didn't remember authorizing any interview. Probably his father's doing, Senator Octavius Albright, always intervening in his life without asking permission. "We're busy now, Teresa. Tell her to come back another day." Michael's crying reached a new level of desperation. Helen, exhausted, handed the baby to her husband. "I need 5 minutes, just 5 minutes," she pleaded, leaving the room with unsteady steps. Maurice awkwardly held his son. Despite all his professional success, he felt completely unprepared for the situation. The office, the meetings, the international negotiations, everything seemed simple compared to the challenge of calming a baby who wouldn't stop crying. It was then that the bedroom door opened again. A young woman around 25, with curly hair tied in a simple bun, entered timidly. "Excuse me, sir, Mrs. Teresa said you might need help while we talk." Maurice was about to protest when the woman approached naturally and asked, in a low voice, "May I try?" Before he could answer, she had already extended her arms. In an automatic gesture, almost desperate for a solution, Maurice handed Michael to the stranger. The woman nestled the baby against her chest and began to hum softly. It was a simple lullaby, one of those that cross generations. Maurice's eyes widened when, in less than a minute, Michael's crying began to subside. The melody, strangely familiar, awakened in him a long-forgotten sense of comfort. "Who are you?" he asked, watching incredulously as Michael calmed down in the stranger's arms. "Louisa Stone, sir. I came for the job interview." "Where did you learn that song?" A discreet smile lit up Louisa's face. "My foster mother used to sing it to me. She said it was a special song, one that calmed even the most restless souls." Helen returned to the room and froze at the door. Her son, who had been crying incessantly for days, was now serene in the arms of a stranger. A mixture of relief and jealousy swept through her body. "What's going on here?" she asked in a trembling voice. "This is Louisa, the candidate for the assistant position," Maurice replied, still impressed. She managed to calm Michael. Louisa approached Helen carefully. "He just needed a different melody, ma'am. Sometimes when we are very tired, our own tension passes to the baby. It's not your fault." Those words, simply spoken, touched Helen deeply. It was the first time someone hadn't judged her for her difficulty in connecting with her son. "I'll leave you now," Louisa said, returning Michael to his mother's arms. Surprisingly, the baby didn't start crying again. "I can wait downstairs for the interview if you still wish." When Louisa left, Helen and Maurice exchanged silent glances. For the first time in weeks, the room was quiet. "Where did she come from?" Helen asked. "Apparently an agency recommendation. Probably my father interfering again. I don't care who recommended her. She has something different." That same afternoon, after a formal interview conducted by Morris, Louisa Stone was hired as the Albrights' domestic assistant. Her resume was modest. She had worked in a few family homes, had no specific training in childcare, and her references, though positive, were vague. Under normal circumstances, Maurice would never have hired her. But circumstances were far from normal. "You start tomorrow," Teresa informed her, handing her a light blue uniform. "The staff room is already prepared. Mr. Albright prefers employees who deal with the baby to reside in the house." Louisa nodded, holding the uniform carefully. As she followed Teresa through the mansion's luxurious corridors, her eyes registered every detail. The signed paintings, the art objects, the family photographs. She paused briefly before the portrait of an elegant lady with grey hair and a serene gaze. "Mrs. Cecilia, Mr. Morris's mother," Teresa explained, noticing her interest. "She passed away 5 years ago. A great lady, respected by all. The family was never the same after." Louisa contemplated the photograph for a few more seconds, an enigmatic glint in her dark eyes. "She seems to have been a special person," she murmured. That night, after settling into the small staff room, Louisa took a delicately embroidered handkerchief from her pocket. In the center, a single word in blue: "Hope." She kissed the fabric softly before placing it under her pillow. Meanwhile, in the master bedroom, Michael slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. Helen watched her son, torn between relief and an uneasiness she couldn't name. Maurice beside her reviewed emails on his laptop. "There's something strange about that woman," Helen commented. "The way Michael reacted to her." Maurice closed his computer and looked at his wife. "We've been trying every possible scientific approach for weeks, without results. If a simple lullaby worked, who are we to question it?" Helen didn't answer. Deep down, a voice warned her that nothing about this situation was simple. The ease with which Louisa Stone had entered their lives, the instant connection with Michael, the melody that seemed to have an almost magical effect. There was something there that escaped her understanding. What Helen didn't imagine was how correct this intuition was and how Louisa's arrival would forever transform the Albright family's life. In the following weeks, Louisa Stone's presence transformed the atmosphere of the Albright mansion. Michael's crying, once constant, became increasingly rare. The routine established by the new employee worked as a balm not only for the baby, but for the entire household. Helen observed, with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension, how her son responded positively to Louisa's care. The woman, with simple gestures and a melodious voice, seemed to understand Michael in a way that she, his own mother, could not. "Do you have children, Louisa?" Helen asked one afternoon, watching the employee skillfully change Michael. "No, ma'am. I never had that blessing," Louisa replied, without diverting her attention from the baby. "Then how do you know so much about children?" Louisa smiled, a smile that never seemed to fully reach her eyes. "I grew up in an orphanage. Since I was little, I helped take care of the babies who arrived. I learned by observing life, ma'am." The answer, though seemingly sincere, left Helen dissatisfied. There was something about Louisa's manner, a mixture of vulnerability and strength that piqued her curiosity. How could someone with a presumably difficult past convey so much serenity? Meanwhile, Morris also noticed changes in his own routine. For the first time since Michael's birth, he began to spend more time at home. He justified it to himself as merely checking on his son's progress. But the truth was that the melody Louisa sang exerted an inexplicable fascination over him. One evening, passing by the baby's room, Maurice stopped at the door. Louisa cradled Michael, softly singing that same song. Without knowing why, he felt his eyes well up. "My mother used to sing that song," he said, surprising himself with the confession. Louisa turned slowly, showing no alarm at her employer's unexpected presence. "It's a beautiful song, sir. It has the power to bring comfort." "Where did you learn it?" For a fleeting instant, something seemed to waver in Louisa's gaze. "A lady who looked after me for a while. She used to say that music was like a sonic embrace." Maurice entered the room and approached the crib. Michael, almost asleep, held Louisa's finger tightly. "He only completely calms down with you," he observed, a slight hint of envy in his voice. "That's not true, sir. He responds well to you too. You just need to trust yourself more." At that moment, as if to prove Louisa's words, Michael released her finger and extended his tiny hand towards his father. Hesitantly, Maurice offered his own finger, which the baby grasped with surprising strength. "See?" Louisa smiled. "He feels your presence, your energy. Sometimes we just need to be truly present." The simplicity of that observation deeply affected Maurice. How many times had he been physically with his son, but mentally absent, preoccupied with spreadsheets, meetings, and market strategies? From that day forward, Maurice began to set aside 30 minutes every night before bed, exclusively to be with Michael. Under Louisa's discreet and approving gaze, he gradually learned to connect with his son. The touch, the gaze, the voice, everything began to flow more naturally. The change did not go unnoticed by Helen. One night, seeing her husband and son interacting with a harmony never before seen, she felt a pang of sadness. Why did she, the mother, still struggle to establish this connection that Louisa had facilitated between father and son? "You can too, ma'am," Louisa said, as if reading her thoughts. "Michael feels your love. You just need to believe in it." "How do you make it seem so easy?" Helen asked, trying to hide the frustration in her voice. "It's not easy, Mom. Love is never simple. But perhaps you are trying too hard. Sometimes it's in silence that we find the deepest connection." That same night, after much hesitation, Helen asked Louisa to teach her the melody that calmed Michael. The employee smiled and began to hum softly. Helen closed her eyes, letting herself be enveloped by the song. There was something about that music, an almost hypnotic quality that transcended the simple notes. Gradually, with Louisa's patient guidance, Helen began to sing along. Her voice, initially trembling and insecure, gained firmness. When she opened her eyes, she saw that Michael was watching her with unusual attention for a baby his age. "He's listening to you, ma'am." "Really?" Louisa said, discreetly stepping away from the crib. Helen continued singing, alone now. To her surprise, Michael smiled. A genuine smile, the first directed exclusively at her. Something broke inside Helen at that moment. The tears, which she had held back for months for fear of appearing weak, finally came not from sadness, but from a deep relief. "Thank you," she murmured to Louisa, when she finally managed to speak. The employee merely nodded in silence, an enigmatic glint in her dark eyes. That same week, the family received an unexpected visit. Senator Octavius Albright, Maurice's father, arrived without warning, as was his custom. Tall, imposing, despite his 70 years, he entered the mansion like someone inspecting a property, not like someone visiting his son's house. "I heard you hired an employee without my recommendation," was his first observation, after the formal greetings. "We don't need your approval for every decision, Father," Maurice replied, tension evident in his voice. The senator ignored the comment and went to the living room, where Helen was holding Michael. For the first time, his grandson did not cry upon seeing his grandfather, which seemed to displease the senator. "Who is this woman you've hired?" he asked Helen directly. "I hear she has no formal qualifications." "Louisa has been a blessing, Octavius," Helen replied with a firmness that surprised even herself. "Michael is finally doing well. And you don't find it strange? A stranger without credentials, achieving what specialists couldn't?" At that moment, Louisa entered the room carrying a tray with tea. The senator turned abruptly and examined her with a critical gaze. Something in his posture changed when he saw her. "You must be Senator Albright," Louisa said politely. "It's an honor to meet you." "Where did you work before, girl?" he asked, ignoring the greeting. In a few family homes, sir. And for a time at the New Dawn Institute. The name seemed to provoke a reaction in the senator, so subtle that only Louisa noticed it. A slight tremor at the corner of his right eye. Never heard of it, he replied, his tone indicating that the conversation was over. Throughout dinner, Octavius Albright kept his eyes fixed on Louisa. Whenever she entered the room, Helen noticed and felt a chill. There was something predatory in that gaze, a suspicion that went beyond her father-in-law's usual distrust of employees. After dessert, the senator asked to speak alone with his son in his study. "You need to fire that woman immediately," he declared. As soon as the door closed, "What are you talking about, father? She solved our problem." "That's exactly the problem, Maurice. Don't you think it's too convenient? A stranger appears out of nowhere and magically gains everyone's trust." Maurice let out an exasperated sigh. "You've always been paranoid, father. Not everyone has ulterior motives." The senator approached, lowering his voice. "Do you think I built our position by being naive? People like us are targets, Maurice, always. Targets of what exactly? Of those who want our power, our influence." The senator paused as if weighing his next words. "I had this Louisa Stone investigated. Do you know what I found? Nothing. Absolutely nothing before 2 years ago. It's as if she appeared out of nowhere. Perhaps she simply didn't have formal documentation. You know the reality for many people." The senator shook his head, frustrated by his son's resistance. "The New Dawn Institute she mentioned closed more than 10 years ago after a scandal that was hushed up. Strange that she would mention that very place, don't you think?" Maurice felt a slight discomfort but quickly dismissed it. "What are you implying, father? That you might be being manipulated? That this woman might have been planted here?" "Planted? By whom, for what?" The senator did not answer directly. "Just keep an eye on her. And for God's sake, don't leave your son alone with her." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Helen with a worried expression. "Michael is agitated." "I can't calm him down," she said, looking at her husband. Maurice hurried out, leaving his father alone in the study. The senator approached the bookshelf and removed a book, revealing a small built-in safe. He typed the combination, and from inside pulled out a blue folder with the stylized symbol of an open hand. He quickly leafed through the contents until he found what he was looking for. An old photograph of a group of uniformed children. His eyes focused on one particular girl, with a piercing gaze. "I knew it," he murmured, putting the folder back with slightly trembling hands. Senator Octavius's visit left a trail of tension in the Albright mansion. Maurice, though he tried to ignore his father's insinuations, began to observe Louisa with more attentive eyes. Helen, for her part, torn between gratitude for the peace the employee had brought and the doubts planted by her father-in-law, intensified her presence in Michael's care. Louisa noticed the subtle change in her employer's behavior, but maintained her routine with the same serene dedication. Only when she was alone in the small staff room did she allow herself moments of deep reflection. On one of those nights, she took a worn-covered notebook from her bag and wrote at length in meticulous handwriting. Day 47 in the Albright house. The senator's visit complicated things. He recognized me, I'm sure. The question is, to what extent? The original plan is compromised. I can no longer separate the mission from true feelings. Michael is not just a target. He is Woody Special, and his family is not what I expected. She closed the notebook with a sigh and hid it under the mattress, along with the embroidered handkerchief. Her instructions had been clear. Observe, record, establish a bond with the heir, collect information about the family's political and business connections. But no one had prepared her for the emotional complexity she would encounter. The next day, upon arriving in the kitchen for breakfast, Louisa found Helen already awake, preparing a bottle. It was the first time she had seen her perform this task without showing anxiety. "Good morning, ma'am." "You're up early today," Louisa commented. "I decided to try doing things my way," Helen replied, focused on the task. "You've taught me a lot, Louisa, but I need to develop my own connection with my son." Louisa smiled, genuinely pleased. "You are absolutely right. Every mother has her own rhythm, her own way of loving." Helen finished preparing the bottle and looked at Louisa. "May I ask you something personal?" "Of course, ma'am. You said you grew up in an orphanage. Did you never meet your biological parents?" The question, though expected, hit Louisa like a physical blow. For an instant, her usual composure wavered. "I did meet my mother, yes," she finally replied. "She worked as a domestic helper in a wealthy family home in Washington, D.C. She passed away when I was 5. "I'm sorry," Helen said, surprised by the revelation. "And your father?" "I never knew who he was." Louisa paused as if considering how much to reveal. "My mother used to say he was a powerful man who couldn't acknowledge my existence." The silence that followed was charged with unspoken tension. Helen realized she had touched a sensitive point. "After my mother passed, I went through several orphanages," Louisa continued, regaining her composure, "until a lady took me in for a while. It was she who taught me the song that calms Michael. That lady, what happened to her?" A sad smile played on Louisa's lips. She had plans to officially adopt me, but her family didn't approve. They thought a girl of unknown origin wasn't suitable for someone of her social standing. Something in the narrative stirred an uneasiness in Helen. There were echoes, parallels she couldn't fully articulate. That same afternoon, Maurice arrived home earlier than usual. He found Michael and Louisa in the garden, under the shade of a mango tree. The scene was so naturally serene that he hesitated to interrupt it. "Is your father well?" Louisa asked, noticing his presence. Maurice approached, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" He seemed shaken during his visit, as if he had seen something that deeply disturbed him. The observation, made with apparent innocence, intrigued Maurice. How had Louisa perceived something he himself hadn't noticed? "My father has always been difficult," he replied evasively. "He built a political empire by being suspicious of everything and everyone." Louisa nodded, not pressing the matter. She passed Michael to his father's arms naturally. "He recognizes your scent," she commented. "See how he snuggles?" Maurice felt the warmth of the small body against his, the implicit trust in that simple gesture. It was a sensation that still surprised him, this feeling of being needed, of being recognized in such an elemental and true way. "You've changed our family, Louisa," he said, without planning it. "You brought something we didn't know was missing." The look the employee gave him contained a complexity that disconcerted him. There was gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, almost painful. "Sometimes, sir, we find purpose in the most unexpected places," she replied, standing up. "I'll prepare Michael's bath." As he watched her walk away through the well-kept garden, Maurice fought against the uncomfortable feeling his father's words had planted. There was something in Louisa's past, some unrevealed mystery. But regardless of her origins or initial motivations, it was undeniable that she had transformed the family dynamic in a positive way. That night after dinner, Helen surprised everyone by announcing that she would partially resume her legal career. "I accepted a pro bono case from an NGO that defends the rights of institutionalized children," she explained. "I'll only work a few hours a week from home." Maurice, who had always supported his wife's career, showed genuine enthusiasm. "It's an important cause. You'll be excellent at it." "Louisa inspired me," Helen admitted. "Her stories about growing up in orphanages made me realize how much we still need to advance in child protection policies." At the mention of her name, Louisa, who was serving dessert, momentarily froze. It was the first time Helen had mentioned their private conversations in front of Maurice. "It's an admirable initiative, ma'am," she commented, resuming her task. "Many children need a voice." "You could help me by sharing your experiences," Helen suggested. "It would be valuable to have the testimony of someone who lived within the system." A tense silence settled. Maurice observed the exchange of glances between the two women with growing curiosity. "It would be an honor, ma'am," Louisa finally replied. "Although some aspects of my past are difficult to revisit." Later that night, when everyone had retired, Louisa received a message on her old cell phone, a basic model she kept hidden. It was a simple text: "Report pending. Deadline expired. Consequences in progress." Her hands trembled slightly. She knew what that meant. The organization was losing patience. She needed to deliver some concrete information or face suspicion of betrayal. But what could she report without compromising the family that, against all expectations, she was beginning to consider her own? Louisa typed a vague reply promising updates soon, knowing she was only buying time. Then, with still trembling fingers, she dialed the rarely used number, the one she had promised to activate only in absolute emergency. "I need help, Raphael," she wrote to her brother. "Things have changed. I can't continue." The reply came almost immediately. "Don't do anything. I'm on my way. 3 days." Putting away her phone, Louisa allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Silent tears ran down her face. What had started as an infiltration mission had become something much more complex. Michael, Helen, even the pragmatic Maurice, all had become important to her. Real people, not mere targets. The original plan was simple. As part of the Blue Brotherhood, she was to establish a bond with the heir of one of the country's most powerful families, gathering information and eventually influencing his future inclinations. It was a long-term power strategy developed by minds that saw children as investments in a controllable future. But no one had accounted for the possibility of genuine affection. No one had foreseen that the song taught to manipulate emotions would awaken real memories, both in her and in Maurice. And most importantly, no one had imagined that the lady who had almost adopted her years ago, the one who had given her the embroidered handkerchief with hope, would be none other than Cecilia Albright, the family's deceased matriarch. The next morning, Louisa found Helen in the study, surrounded by documents. On the table were several reports about the New Dawn Institute. "I was researching for the case," Helen explained, noticing Louisa's surprised look. "This institute you mentioned, apparently it was closed after serious allegations." Louisa felt her heart race. Helen's investigation was getting dangerously close to the truth. "It was a confusing time," she replied cautiously. "I was very young. I didn't fully understand what was happening. The allegations mentioned something called Project Blue. Do you know what that was about?" The direct question caught Louisa by surprise. She hesitated, torn between the truth that threatened to escape and loyalty to a system that had shaped her, but which she now distrusted. "There were rumors," she finally said, "about children selected for special purposes, trained to adapt to certain environments." Helen frowned, intrigued. "What kind of environments?" "Influential families." Louisa paused, carefully choosing her words. The project claimed to create opportunities for talented orphans, but there was something deeper, something about shaping the future through strategic connections. "That sounds like some kind of conspiracy theory," Helen commented, although her tone suggested she didn't entirely dismiss the idea. "Reality is sometimes stranger than any conspiracy," Ma'am, Louisa replied with a sad smile, "especially when it involves power and influence." The sound of the doorbell interrupted the conversation. It was Teresa announcing that Senator Octavius had arrived again without prior notice. "He asked to speak with Mr. Maurice urgently," the housekeeper explained. "He said it's about the family's security." Helen and Louisa exchanged worried glances. Something in the employee's expression, a mix of resignation and determination, made Helen realize they were about to cross a point of no return. "What has he discovered, Louisa?" she asked, lowering her voice. "What aren't you telling me?" Before the employee could answer, they heard heavy footsteps in the corridor. Senator Octavius appeared at the study door, accompanied by 2 official-looking men. "Where is my son?" he demanded, ignoring formalities. "In Michael's room," Helen replied, standing up. "What's happening?" The look the senator gave Louisa was charged with accusation. "We are about to find out how far this infiltration goes," he declared, gesturing to the men accompanying him. "Bring her to the study. It's time to end this charade." Louisa remained strangely calm, as if she had long awaited this moment. "You should get Michael, Mrs. Albright," she said softly. "He shouldn't witness what's coming." In Maurice Albright's spacious study, a palpable tension dominated the atmosphere. Senator Octavius stood, imposing in his impeccable suit, while Louisa occupied a chair in the center of the room, surrounded by the official-looking men. Helen, with Michael in her arms, had refused to leave the room despite Louisa's suggestion. Maurice, visibly disturbed, alternated his gaze between his father and the employee. "Explain yourself, father," he finally demanded. "What are these accusations?" Senator Octavius took a folder from his jacket and placed it on the table. "This woman is not who she claims to be," he declared, opening the document. "Louisa Stone is a fabricated name. She is part of an organization called the Blue Brotherhood, a group that infiltrates people into influential families for long-term manipulation." A heavy silence followed the accusation. All eyes turned to Louisa, who maintained a disconcerting calm. "Is it true?" Helen asked, her voice betraying a mixture of disbelief and hurt. Louisa took a deep breath before answering. "Part of it is true, yes," she finally admitted. "My real name is Louisa Mendez. I was recruited by the Blue Brotherhood when I was just 8 years old, after my mother's death." Morris felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. The confirmation, though partial, hit him like a physical blow. "Why?" was all he could manage to ask. "The Brotherhood selects children with certain characteristics," Louisa explained, keeping her voice firm. "Natural empathy, emotional intelligence, adaptability. We are trained to establish bonds, to understand the emotional patterns of designated families." "For what purpose?" Maurice insisted. Louisa hesitated, her eyes meeting Michael's, who watched her with unusual attention. "Originally, it was a secret governmental program created during the military regime," she replied. "The objective was to monitor families with potential opposition. Over time it evolved. It became an independent network, financed by powerful people who realized that true control did not come from force, but from emotional influence, especially over new generations." Senator Octavius intervened, his voice filled with triumph. "Do you see now the danger you brought into your home? She is here to indoctrinate my grandson, to shape his future inclinations." Louisa turned to the senator, a defiant glint in her eyes. "You know more about the Brotherhood than you're admitting, don't you, Senator Albright?" The question caused visible discomfort in the older man. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied dryly. "Yes, you do." Louisa slowly stood up. The New Dawn Institute wasn't just an orphanage. It was a recruitment and training center, and it was funded by the Albright Foundation for over 2 decades. The revelation dropped like a bomb in the room. Maurice stared at his father, a silent question in his eyes. "This is absurd," the senator protested, though a slight tremor in his voice suggested otherwise. "She's trying to deflect attention, creating conspiracies." "It's not a conspiracy," Louisa said, her voice gaining strength. "Mrs. Cecilia discovered the truth years ago. That's why she tried to adopt me, to get me out of the system. And that's why you interfered, wasn't it? To protect the family's investment." The mention of his deceased wife seemed to shake the senator. "Cecilia was always too sentimental," he murmured, almost to himself. "She never understood the necessity of certain arrangements." Maurice advanced towards his father, shock and anger evident on his face. "What did you do? What does our family have to do with this?" Senator Octavius regained his composure, adjusting his tie in an automatic gesture. "Your grandfather was one of the founders of the Blue Brotherhood. Not out of malice, Maurice, but out of foresight. He understood that the country needed a prepared elite, molded from childhood. Conventional institutions were slow, inefficient. We needed a more directed system. A system that used orphaned children as pawns," Helen interjected, indignation in her voice. "That trained them to emotionally manipulate other people. It was an opportunity for them." The senator defended himself. "Children who had nothing received quality education, specialized training. To serve as emotional spies?" Maurice questioned, contempt evident in his voice. Louisa stepped forward. "The first generation of the Brotherhood was composed mainly of domestic servants," she explained. "Invisible people within elite homes, who heard everything, observed everything. Over time, the method became more sophisticated. We began to occupy more strategic positions, nannies, tutors, personal companions." Helen clutched Michael to her chest, an instinctive protective gesture. "So everything was a lie? Your connection with my son, all calculated?" The question seemed to hit Louisa deeply. For the first time since the confrontation began, her composure wavered. "It started as a mission, yes," she admitted, tears glistening in her eyes. "But it became real. That was never in the plan. We were never supposed to develop true affections." Maurice, still processing the revelations, suddenly remembered something. "The song, the music you sing to Michael." "It was the song your mother sang to you," Louisa confirmed. "Mrs. Cecilia taught it to me during the brief period she took me in. She said it was a family tradition, passed down through generations, that it carried the love of all who came before." Senator Octavius visibly paled. "Impossible. Cecilia wouldn't have—" "She knew, Senator," Louisa interrupted. "She found out about the family's involvement with the Brotherhood and tried to dismantle the system from within. That's why she sought out children from the Institute. Not just me, but several others." She kept records, documented everything. One of the men accompanying the senator approached, speaking in a low voice to his ear. So Octavius Albright waved him away and turned to his son and daughter-in-law. This conversation has gone too far. These men will take this imposter. The matter will be handled discreetly. No, Maurice's voice was firm, surprising everyone. No one is taking Louisa anywhere. Not until we fully understand what happened. The senator stared at his son, disbelief in his eyes. Are you defending a spy who infiltrated your home? Who manipulated your son? I am defending a person who brought peace to my family, Maurice replied. And from what I'm hearing, possibly a victim of a system that our own family helped create. At that moment, the mansion's intercom rang. Teresa entered the study, visibly nervous. Sirs, there's a man at the door. He says he's Louisa's brother and that he's here at her request. All eyes turned again to the employee. Raphael, she murmured. My brother was also raised by the Brotherhood. He managed to escape their control a few years ago. I asked for his help when I realized I could no longer fulfill my original mission. Bring him in, Maurice ordered, ignoring his father's protest. Minutes later, a man of approximately 30 entered the study. Tall, athletically built, he had the same intense eyes as Louisa. In his hands, he carried a small bag. Sorry I'm late, Lou, he said, ignoring the others present. I had to make sure I wasn't followed. Louisa introduced him formally. This is Rafael Mendez, my brother. Not by blood, but by upbringing. We grew up together in the system. Rafael quickly assessed the situation in the room, his gaze resting on Senator Octavius. I see the revelations have already begun, he commented. How much do they know? The basics, Louisa replied. About the Brotherhood, my original mission, the Albright family's connection. Raphael nodded and placed the bag on the table. I brought what you asked for, he said, opening the compartment. From inside, he took out an old laptop and a carved wooden box. Mrs. Cecilia's records. She foresaw this day would come. Senator Octavius stepped forward, trying to intercept the objects. That is Albright family property. Raphael blocked his advance with surprising agility. Actually, Senator, Mrs. Cecilia entrusted these items to Louisa before she passed away. I merely kept them safe. Maurice approached the table, examining the box with curiosity. How did you know my mother? He asked Raphael. I was part of her collection of strangers, as your father used to call it, the man replied with a slight smile. Mrs. Cecilia took in children from the Brotherhood whenever she could. Not for formal adoption, as your husband usually blocked that path, but to give us an experience of a true family, even if temporary. She knew we were being trained to manipulate, so she taught us to feel genuinely. The revelation seemed to touch Maurice deeply. Memories of his childhood, of faces that had briefly passed through his home began to make sense. Mom's protégés, he murmured. I remember you all. Raphael smiled. You were just a child. But Mrs. Cecilia spoke of you often. She said your heart was like hers, just asleep under your father's expectations. Senator Octavius, seeing that he was losing control of the situation, tried a new approach. All this is very moving. But it doesn't change the facts, he declared. This woman and this man are trained agents of a clandestine organization. They pose a risk to this family, especially to the child. Helen, who until then had remained silent, attentively observing the interactions, finally spoke. The only person who seems to pose a risk to this family is you, Octavius. Her voice was firm, without her usual conciliatory tone. Your involvement with this Brotherhood, your manipulation of your own family, your disrespect for your wife's memory. You don't understand, Helen, the senator replied condescendingly. There are bigger issues at stake. The stability of certain institutions depends on continuity, on control. At what cost? Maurice interjected. Using vulnerable children. Manipulating emotions? What kind of stability is built on exploitation? The debate was interrupted by the sound of Michael, who began to stir in his mother's arms. His little eyes sought Louisa, tiny arms outstretched towards her. The innocent gesture seemed in some way more eloquent than all the arguments presented. Helen, after a moment of hesitation, approached Louisa and allowed her to take the baby. Michael calmed down immediately, nestling against the employee's chest with absolute trust. See? Louisa said softly, looking at the senator. This can't be faked. It can't be trained. It's real. The scene seemed to capture the essence of the dilemma they faced, the complex truth that genuine connections can be born even from the most improbable contexts, from the most calculated intentions. "What do you really want, Louisa?" Maurice asked, his voice softer now. Louisa looked at the baby in her arms, then at Helen, and finally at Maurice. "I want to break the cycle," she replied simply. "I want Michael to grow up knowing that true affection is not a tool of control. I want the truth about the brotherhood to come out, so that other children are not used as I was." The old laptop Raphael had brought contained much more than they expected. As Maurice navigated through the files, his expression alternated between shock and indignation. Helen, sitting beside him, occasionally covered her mouth with her hands, unable to hide her horror at the revelations. "It's more extensive than we imagined," Raphael commented, observing the couple's reactions. "Your mother meticulously documented everything for over 2 decades. Senator Octavius remained in a corner of the study, seemingly resigned now that the secrets were beginning to come to light. His men had been dismissed by Maurice, who had unexpectedly taken control of the situation. "Here," Maurice said, stopping at a specific file, "a list of founding families of the project. Matthews, Cavendish, Albrights. Practically the entire political and economic elite of the country is involved. The Brotherhood began as a social re-engineering project during the military regime," explained Louisa, who was cradling Michael in her arms. "The original idea was to create a new generation of leaders through emotional influence from early childhood." Helen examined another document. "Their detailed spreadsheet of children recruited over the years. There are hundreds of names here," she murmured, horrified. "All these young people were trained like you?" Louisa nodded gravely. "Most don't know the full extent of the system. We receive specific training, develop particular skills, but rarely have access to the complete picture. I myself only began to understand when Mrs. Cecilia took me in." Maurice opened a video on the computer. The image of his mother, Cecilia Albright, filled the screen, younger than in his last memories, but with the same determined gaze he had inherited. "If you are seeing this," she began, "it means that circumstances have prevented me from completing my personal mission. I discovered the truth about the Blue Brotherhood by accident, when I noticed patterns in the people who worked for families like ours. Exceptionally intuitive employees, nannies with almost supernatural abilities to calm children, tutors who shaped perspectives and inclinations without seeming to do so deliberately." The recording continued, detailing how Cecilia had traced the program's origins back to her own family, discovering that her father-in-law, the Albright patriarch, had been one of the architects of the original system. The project had evolved from a state initiative into a private network, maintained by those who saw value in controlling future generations through strategic emotional bonds. "I tried to dismantle the system from within," Cecilia confessed in the video. "I started to adopt children from the Brotherhood, not officially, as Octavius always blocked the processes, but offering them an experience of genuine affection. My hope was that by knowing true love, they would become immune to manipulation and eventually subvert the system itself." Senator Octavius averted his gaze from the screen, visibly disturbed by his deceased wife's words. "If I'm recording this," Cecilia continued, "it is because I fear my time is limited. There are rumors that the Brotherhood's directors suspect my activities. I ask whoever finds these files to complete what I started, expose the truth, protect the children still in the system, and above all, teach my son Maurice that true power does not come from control, but from the ability to love genuinely." The video ended. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by Michael's soft cooing in Louisa's arms. "When was this?" Maurice asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Approximately 6 months before her passing," Raphael replied. "She left us specific instructions on how to act if something happened to her." Maurice turned to his father, a new understanding in his gaze. "Mother's sudden illness. Was it really natural?" Senator Octavius raised his chin, defensive. "I loved your mother, Maurice. I would never do anything to harm her." "But you knew others might," Maurice insisted, "and you did nothing to protect her." "Cecilia knew what she was getting into," the senator replied, his trembling voice betraying his insecurity. "I warned her about the risks, but she was stubborn, idealistic. How did my mother really die?" Maurice's voice was sharp now, demanding the truth he had suspected for years. Senator Octavius collapsed into an armchair, suddenly looking much older than his 70 years. It was presented as a sudden stroke, but he hesitated, the weight of the truth finally overcoming decades of denial. There were substances in her system, substances that induce that condition, without leaving detectable traces in conventional exams. Helen stifled a cry of horror. Louisa approached Maurice as if offering silent support. "Why didn't you do anything?" Maurice asked, tears of anger in his eyes. "She was your wife." "The system was bigger than any individual," the senator replied almost mechanically. "The stability of institutions was at stake. Cecilia was exposing something that should not have come to light. The consequences would have been catastrophic for the established order." Maurice rose abruptly, advancing towards his father with clenched fists. Raphael quickly intervened, placing himself between the two. "Violence won't solve anything," he said firmly. "Your mother wouldn't have wanted that. You knew." Maurice turned to Louisa, his voice now more controlled, yet laden with emotion. "About my mother, about all this?" Louisa nodded slowly. "Not all the details, but enough to understand my mission. I was sent specifically to your family because of Mrs. Cecilia's history. The Brotherhood suspected she might have left records, instructions. My initial goal was to locate those documents and establish influence over your son, correcting what they considered the ideological deviation caused by your mother." "And when did that change?" Helen asked. A sad smile played on Louisa's lips. "The moment Michael stopped crying in my arms, when I sang the song his grandmother taught me, and saw Maurice's reaction, I realized I couldn't betray Mrs. Cecilia's trust, that there was something more important than my instructions." Raphael opened the wooden box he had brought along with the laptop. Inside there were official documents, old photographs, and a set of small digital storage devices. "Cecilia created a protection network," he explained. "Former Brotherhood members she rescued, influential people who discovered the truth and opposed the system, investigative journalists who were on the trail, all waiting for the right moment to act." "And that moment is now?" Maurice asked. Raphael and Louisa exchanged meaningful glances. "It depends on you," Raphael replied. "Your position, your name, your access to resources. You have the power to expose everything in a way that cannot be ignored or suppressed." Senator Octavius stood up, regaining some of his authoritarian posture. "You have no idea of the forces you would face, Maurice. It's not just our family. It's generations of consolidated power in all sectors of society. Exposing the Brotherhood would destabilize the very system that guarantees your privileged position." Maurice stared at his father with a coldness he had never shown before. "My privileged position was built on the suffering of vulnerable children, on the manipulation of fundamental human relationships, on the death of my own mother." He paused, looking at Michael in Louisa's arms. "What kind of legacy are we leaving? What kind of world are we building?" Helen stood up, positioning herself beside her husband. "If we do nothing, we will be perpetuating the system," she said firmly. "Michael will grow up in the same environment of manipulation and control. Is that what we want for him?" The argument seemed to deeply affect Maurice. He approached Louisa and gently touched his son's head. "What would my mother have done?" he asked, almost to himself. "She already told you," Louisa replied gently. "In the video." Maurice nodded, a new resolve on his face. "We'll need a plan," he said, turning to Raphael. "Something that ensures the truth reaches the public in an undeniable way, but also protects the children and young people still in the system." "I have contacts in the press," Helen offered. "And my legal experience can be useful in structuring the allegations in a legally sound way." Senator Octavius watched the scene with a mixture of despair and resignation. "You have no idea what you're unleashing," he warned. "The Brotherhood has connections at all levels. There will be retaliation." "Then we need protection," Maurice replied pragmatically. "Public visibility, strategic allies, a plan to anticipate reactions." Raphael smiled, admiring Maurice's quick adaptation to the situation. "You have more of your mother than you imagine," he commented. "That kind of strategic thinking, but oriented towards the greater good." That was exactly how Mrs. Cecilia operated. In the following hours, a plan began to take shape in the Albright study. "Helen, using her legal expertise, structured the legal narrative of the allegations. Raphael shared his internal knowledge of the organization, identifying vulnerable points and potential allies. Louisa contributed her unique understanding of the emotional dimension of the system, how control was maintained through subtle psychological manipulation. Maurice, in turn, did what he did best, managed resources and established strategies. He began to list his reliable connections in various sectors, people who could offer support when the storm began. Senator Octavius remained in the room, initially as a reluctant observer, then as an increasingly engaged participant. To everyone's surprise, he began to offer valuable information about the Brotherhood's internal workings, names of key figures, details about funding and operational structure. "Why are you helping us now?" Maurice questioned, suspicious of his father's sudden cooperation. The senator looked at his grandson for a long time, who was now sleeping peacefully in Helen's arms. "Because your mother was right," he replied, his voice choked with rarely shown emotion. "Always was. It took me too long to realize that. Perhaps it's too late for me, but not for Michael. Not for the future." As the night advanced, the plan became more concrete. They decided that the exposure would happen on multiple fronts simultaneously. A documentary with testimonies from former Brotherhood members, strategic legal actions, coordinated dissemination of documents to selected press outlets, and the establishment of a foundation to support the system's victims. "We need a name for the foundation," Helen commented, outlining the organization's statute. "Something that captures the essence of what we want to build." Louisa, who had been silent for some time, took the embroidered handkerchief with hope from her pocket. "Mrs. Cecilia gave me this before she passed away," she explained. "She used to say that true hope is not in controlling the future, but in giving new generations the tools to build it freely." Maurice took the handkerchief, recognizing it immediately. "It was my grandmother's," he said, touching the embroidery with reverence. "It passed through generations of the family, long before the Brotherhood, the power schemes. It represented something more fundamental, more human." "Hope Foundation?" Helen suggested. "No," Maurice replied after a moment's reflection. "The Listening Foundation. Because that's what was missing in this whole system. The ability to truly listen to children, their needs, their dreams. To treat them as people, not as projects." The suggestion was met with unanimous approval. Amidst the tension of the revelations and the anxiety about the approaching confrontation, there was now a shared sense of purpose, a vision of what could emerge from the ashes of a corrupted system. While the others finalized the plan's details, Louisa discreetly moved away. In the mansion's garden, under the starry London sky, she allowed herself a moment of contemplation. Her entire life had been shaped by the Brotherhood. Every skill she possessed, every instinct she followed, everything had been cultivated for specific purposes. And now she was helping to dismantle the very system that had created her. Raphael found her there, sitting on a bench under a mango tree. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Identity," she replied after a moment. "Who am I without the Brotherhood? What remains when we remove everything that was imposed, trained, programmed?" Raphael smiled, understanding. "That's the question we all eventually face. The answer is simpler and more complex than it seems." "And what is it?" "You are whoever you choose to be from now on." Raphael pointed to the illuminated mansion. "Look at what happened here today. You had a mission, clear instructions, years of training, and yet you chose the path of genuine affection, truth, courage. That didn't come from the Brotherhood. It came from you." Raphael's words resonated deeply with Louisa. For the first time, she glimpsed a future beyond the limitations she had always accepted as inevitable. A future where her choices, not her training, would define who she was. "Are we ready?" Maurice asked, joining them in the garden. Louisa looked at him, then at the mansion where Helen was cradling Michael, and finally at the starry sky above. "We are," she replied, a new certainty in her voice. "It's time for us to listen to each other's voices." The following months were a perfect storm of revelations, confrontations, and transformations. The meticulously elaborated strategy from that night in the Albright mansion was put into practice with almost surgical precision. The first step was protection. Before any information came to light, Morris used his resources to ensure the safety of everyone involved. The mansion received a reinforced security system, and Raphael activated his network of former Brotherhood members, creating an alert system that monitored any suspicious movements by figures linked to the organization. Helen, with her legal experience and contacts in the field, prepared preventive injunctions that would prevent hasty legal actions against them when the allegations came to light. Simultaneously, she organized a legal dossier containing testimonies from dozens of people who had passed through the Brotherhood system, carefully verified and documented. Senator Octavius, in a surprising gesture of redemption, provided names and documents that proved the involvement of powerful figures in the scheme over decades. His testimony as an insider of the political elite lent credibility to the allegations that, otherwise, could have been easily dismissed as conspiracy theories. When everything was prepared, the storm was deliberately unleashed. On a Monday morning, 3 of the country's largest media outlets simultaneously published extensive articles about the Blue Brotherhood, backed by documents, videos, and testimonies. On the same day, the documentary produced with Raphael's help, titled The Invisible Children of Power, was made available on digital platforms, reaching millions of views in a few hours. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. As the population absorbed in shock the revelations about a network of emotional manipulation that had operated in the shadows for decades, the power system went into convulsion. Politicians denied involvement. Businessmen issued evasive statements. Supposedly philanthropic institutions announced internal audits. But the wave was too strong to be contained. Former Brotherhood members, encouraged by Louisa and Raphael's courage, began to come forward with their own accounts. The pattern was always the same: vulnerable children recruited from orphanages, trained to establish strategic emotional bonds, and subsequently infiltrated into influential families under various roles: nannies, tutors, companions, domestic staff. Amidst the media frenzy, the Albright family simultaneously became both target and symbol. Maurice, Helen, Michael, and Louisa were portrayed in contradictory ways, sometimes as victims exposing a perverse system, sometimes as skillful manipulators in a power play. The truth, as always, was more complex than any simplistic narrative. 2 months after the initial revelations, when the matter already dominated the national public debate, Maurice decided to take a bold step. In an exclusive interview for one of the most-watched programs on national television, he, Helen, and Louisa appeared together for the first time, with Michael on Helen's lap. "We are here as a family," Maurice declared, his voice firm despite the evident tension. "A family formed by extraordinary circumstances, but united by something stronger than any system of manipulation: the conscious choice for genuine affection." Helen, holding Michael tenderly, added, "What the Brotherhood never understood is that emotional control has its limits. When people are exposed to true unconditional affection, something awakens that no training can suppress." Louisa, sitting beside them, shared for the first time in public her complete experience, from childhood in the system to the moment she decided to break with her programming. Her testimony, marked by restrained emotion and impressive clarity, humanized what many had previously seen as merely an abstract scheme of manipulation. "I am not here as a victim, nor as some kind of heroine," she stated, looking directly into the camera. "I am here as someone who had the chance to choose a different path. And that is the opportunity we want to create for all children still trapped in this system. For all young people and adults who, like me, were molded to serve interests they never chose." The interview transformed public perception of the case. The image of the Albright family with Louisa, united around Michael, became a powerful symbol of reconciliation and overcoming. On social media, hashtags like #GastIChooseToListen and #FamilyIsChoice went viral, accompanying testimonies from people who, inspired by the example, began to question their own family dynamics. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the battle was far from won. A series of lawsuits were filed against the family, accusing them of defamation, breach of confidentiality, and even kidnapping, alleging that Louisa was under coercion. Manipulated videos circulated on the internet, distorting speeches and situations to discredit the whistleblowers. Economic pressures were exerted against Maurice's companies, with business partners suddenly breaking contracts under dubious pretexts. It was in this context of escalating pressure that what would later be known as the hearing that changed the nation occurred. The Parliamentary Inquiry Commission on Human Rights convened a public hearing to discuss the allegations about the Blue Brotherhood. What should have been a formal procedure, potentially controlled to minimize damage, turned into a historic moment thanks to an unexpected element. On the day of the hearing, as Louisa gave her testimony before visibly uncomfortable senators, the chamber door opened. A group of more than 50 people entered silently, positioning themselves at the back of the room. They were men and women of all ages, each holding a small blue handkerchief, the symbol that, as revealed in the exposed documents, was used by the Brotherhood to identify its agents in strategic positions. Raphael, who coordinated the group, stepped forward. "We are the invisible sons and daughters of the system," he declared, his voice reverberating in the silent hall. "We are here not to accuse, but to finally be seen, to have our stories recognized, to choose for the first time our own path." One by one they introduced themselves. A parliamentary aide, who had served for decades in the Senate itself. A doctor, who exclusively treated families of the political elite. A private school teacher attended by children of influential businessmen. A driver who transported ministers. Each briefly told their story, how they were recruited, trained, positioned, how their lives had been instrumentalized for the interests of others. The impact was devastating. There, before the eyes of the nation watching the live broadcast, was living proof of a system that few wanted to believe truly existed. These were not conspiracy theories, not abstract accusations. They were real people, with painfully authentic stories. The hearing, scheduled to last 2 hours, extended for more than 8. At the end, as the visibly shaken committee chairman tried to close the proceedings, one last person asked to speak. It was a woman of about 80, with white hair tied in a simple bun, who identified herself as Margaret Olive. "I was a domestic helper in the Albright home for over 30 years, she said, with a fragile but determined voice. "I saw young Octavius grow up, marry sweet Cecilia, witnessed Maurice's birth and childhood." She paused, taking a deep breath. "And I also saw over decades the children Mrs. Cecilia tried to save, children who appeared for short periods, who received affection and guidance before being taken back into the system by order of the senator." Margaret's testimony confirmed everything that had been revealed about Cecilia Albright's role as an internal resistor to the Brotherhood system. But she had more to say. "Mrs. Cecilia trusted me before she passed away," she continued. "She gave me a sealed envelope, with instructions to open it only if something happened to her, and if one day the truth about the Brotherhood came out." Taking a yellowed envelope from her pocket, Margaret looked directly at the cameras. "Today is that day." The contents of the envelope proved explosive. An alternative will by Cecilia Albright, formally recognizing her intention to adopt Louisa and other young people rescued from the Brotherhood, allocating a significant portion of her personal fortune to the creation of a foundation dedicated to protecting vulnerable children and promoting healthy, effective bonds. The document, legally valid but never presented after her death, directly challenged the control Senator Octavius had maintained over his wife's legacy. The outcome of the hearing marked a definitive turning point in the public narrative about the case. From a complex and abstract political-social scandal, the issue of the Blue Brotherhood transformed into a tangible human drama, with faces, names, and stories that resonated deeply with the population. In the following weeks, a series of institutional developments materialized what had begun as an allegation. A parliamentary inquiry commission was established to formally investigate the Brotherhood's political connections. The Federal Public Prosecutor's Office created a task force dedicated to mapping and dismantling institutions linked to the scheme. The Bar Association established a special group to offer legal support to the system's victims. In parallel to these official developments, the Listening Foundation, officially established by Maurice and Helen with Raphael's technical support and Louisa's emotional core, began to operate concretely. Utilizing a significant portion of the Albrights' personal fortune, the foundation created reception programs for young people disconnected from the Brotherhood, offering specialized psychological support, educational reintegration, and genuine professional opportunities. The old Albright mansion in Kensington, laden with complex memories and symbolism, was converted into the Foundation's headquarters. The luxurious halls became therapy and reception spaces. The immense garden, once a symbol of elitist isolation, opened up for community activities. The room that had been Michael's became the heart of the project, a study center on healthy child development and authentic emotional connections. The family itself moved to a more modest apartment in Greenwich, seeking a less ostentatious life, more integrated into London's urban reality. Maurice stepped back from direct management of his businesses, dedicating himself primarily to the Foundation. Helen resumed her legal career with a focus on children's rights, becoming a respected voice in national and international forums on the topic. Louisa, after an intense process of self-discovery, decided to formalize her education. She enrolled in a psychology course, determined to transform her traumatic experience into a tool for healing others. Her relationship with Michael naturally evolved into a special bond, no longer that of an employee or caregiver, but of a constant affectionate presence, a kind of informal godmother recognized and celebrated by Helen and Maurice. Senator Octavius, after his ambivalent role in the revelations, gradually withdrew from public life. In a symbolic gesture that surprised many, he donated his mansion in Washington, D.C. to be transformed into a reception center for vulnerable children. At the inauguration of the space, already weakened by age and tumultuous events, he made a brief but impactful statement. Cecilia was right. Always was. It took me a lifetime to understand that true legacy is not built with control and manipulation, but with the courage to listen and the humility to change. The deepest transformation, however, occurred at the legislative level, directly inspired by the Blue Brotherhood case and Louisa's personal story with the Albright family. A proposal for new legislation emerged that would formally recognize non-biological affective bonds as a basis for family rights. The project, initially called the Law of Connection, was popularly renamed the Law of Listening, a name that captured the essence of the proposed social transformation. After months of heated debates, public hearings, and intense social mobilization, the law was finally approved. Its text established parameters for the legal recognition of significant affective ties, regardless of biological kinship, especially in cases involving children and adolescents. It also created protection mechanisms against the instrumentalization of emotional relationships, establishing the fundamental right of every child to authentic and manipulation-free affective connections. At the signing ceremony of the Law of Listening, symbolically held at the headquarters of the Listening Foundation, Maurice, Helen, Louisa, and Raphael were present as guests of honor. Michael, now almost 2 years old, observed everything with the natural curiosity of his age. When the formalities were concluded and the speeches ended, something unexpected happened. Michael, who until then had only spoken isolated, simple words, walked purposefully to the microphone, abandoned in the center of the stage. With the surprising ease of children who grow up surrounded by love and stimulation, he approached the equipment and, to everyone's astonishment, clearly and distinctly pronounced, "To listen is to love." The phrase, seemingly simple but charged with an almost mystical symbolism in that context, was captured by dozens of cameras and quickly went viral. Analysts debated whether it was mere coincidence, a reproduction of something he had constantly heard at home, or one of those inexplicable moments when children seem to channel truths greater than their understanding. For Louisa, however, there was no mystery. Seeing Michael utter those words, she remembered the embroidered handkerchief with hope that Cecilia had given her years earlier. She remembered the melody that had calmed the baby at their first meeting. She remembered Maurice's look of recognition upon hearing her sing. It was the cycle completing itself, living proof that genuine affections transcend systems, manipulations, and even time. That night, after the celebration, the small family gathered in their apartment. Michael was already asleep, exhausted by the day's emotions. Helen and Maurice talked in low voices on the balcony, planning the Foundation's next steps. Louisa, sitting at the kitchen table with Raphael, leafed through a recently assembled photo album, a visual record of the extraordinary journey they had taken. "Do you think we succeeded?" she asked Raphael, contemplating a photograph of the Foundation's current headquarters, filled with smiling children and young people. Really break the cycle? Raphael considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think we planted a seed," he replied after a moment. "The Brotherhood system took decades to build, to infiltrate power structures. It won't disappear completely overnight. But now people know," Louisa completed. "Children know they have a choice, that they can be heard." "Exactly," Raphael smiled, pointing to a photograph of Michael with Helen, Maurice, and Louisa. "And this little one will grow up in a world where emotional connection is not a strategy of control, but a way to grow together. That in itself is already a revolution." Louisa nodded, feeling a peace she had never imagined possible when she entered that mansion in Kensington months ago with a specific mission and a divided heart. Her gaze rested on one last photograph, a close-up of Michael smiling, with that genuine joy that only truly loved children can express. "Mrs. Cecilia would be proud," she murmured, gently tracing the outline of the child's face in the photograph. "Of all of us." From the bedroom came the soft sound of Michael mumbling in his sleep. Out of habit, Louisa got up and went there. The boy stirred restlessly, perhaps reliving the day's agitation in his dreams. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she began to hum softly the familiar melody, the one that, unknowingly, Cecilia had transformed from an instrument of manipulation into a vehicle of genuine affection. As she sang, she watched Michael's face gradually relax, peace returning to his childish features. And in that simple gesture, in that elementary connection between two human beings, Louisa found the answer to all the questions that had tormented her, about identity, purpose, belonging. What existed between them was not the result of training or programming. It was something older, deeper, and infinitely more powerful than any control system ever conceived. It was the fundamental human capacity to truly listen to each other, not as a strategy, but as a recognition of shared humanity. And that, Louisa finally understood, was what no system could truly control, no matter how sophisticated, because the moment we truly listen, we become free. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Louisa and the Albright family has deeply touched your hearts. The journey we followed, from manipulation to truth, from control to genuine affection, reminds us that the most powerful human connections are those based on the conscious choice to truly love and listen. If this story about the transformative power of authentic affection resonated with you, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more narratives exploring the complexities of the human heart. Leave a like as a sign of support and share your thoughts in the comments. What moment in this story touched you the most? What other stories about unexpected and transformative bonds would you like to hear? Remember that just as Michael discovered, to listen is to love, and we are here to listen to you too. Until the next story.